This is Big Podcast with David Hooper.
David is new to our school. David. 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 David.
Have you ever talked to somebody, maybe on your podcast, maybe not on your podcast, maybe day-to-day life, that you know something to be a fact, like your name, and they're going to argue with you about that? That happens. Sometimes it happens. And again, sometimes that's on your podcast. It's a weird thing. Some of those things can be avoided. We're going to talk about that. This is Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. A podcast all about growing your podcast, creating a better podcast, getting people to talk about your podcast, getting people to spread your message, send you money, making a podcast that matters. That's what this is about. You can find me online at bigpodcast.com. If you're going to have somebody on your podcast, you want to be respectful. And let me be clear about that. That is not necessarily letting somebody come in, use your airwaves. Let's use a radio term for that. Use your power, your platform, to reach your audience and spread propaganda or disinformation or misinformation. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not being respectful of your audience. And your audience, listeners, they come first. What I mean by being respectful is that you have an accurate portrayal of somebody, no manipulative edits. You don't get somebody into your podcast saying one thing, we're going to talk about this, but then you give them that. You'll see this happen sometimes on something like Borat. That's a comedy film. Look, if that's your business, I'm not making any judgment. Maybe that is your podcast. In that case, go for it. That's your podcast. What I am saying is, in general, I believe in having a respectful place for guests. That means listening to somebody when they talk. I'm not saying you have to always agree with the guest, but don't pull a Sean Hannity. Don't let him talk. Ask a question. What do you think about this? Blah, 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 and talking right over them. Not letting them get more than a couple words out. That's not respectful. Probably the easiest thing, and this is really why I'm doing this episode, because this is so common. You got a hint of it at the beginning of this episode. It's getting the person's name right. Way too many people overlook this. They make assumptions. David or David, spelled the same way. We can't make assumptions. By the way, speaking of this name, David, I know a little bit about it because that's my name. David has been one of the most popular names for years because it crosses cultures. Black people name their kids David. White people name their kids David. Mexican people name their kids David. Jewish people name their kids David. You don't see that with a lot of names. A lot of names are monoculture. But even then, we can't just make assumptions that because we've seen it one place that your guest that you might not have interacted with, you might have only written things to and not actually heard their names, those names are going to be pronounced the same way that you've heard before. I verify all names. Your name's John Smith, I'm verifying it. Okay, so your name's John Smith, Johnsmith, that's John Smith. Is that right? Yes, John Smith. Could you say it for me, please? John Smith. Same for company names. The reason I got into this, one time I did an interview, again, I'd seen this thing in writing, thought it was pronounced one way. 50 minutes in, he goes, oh yeah, by the way, it's pronounced like this. Dude, why did you not let me know? And the reason people don't let you know, again, this is a cultural thing. Sometimes you're interviewing people of different cultures. If you're the host, they're the guest, there's a power dynamic there. Some people are very nervous about correcting the host, especially with certain cultures. So I'm going to let people know, even with that verification, hey, sometimes I get things wrong. Not just names, but sometimes dates, whatever. And I tell people, should that happen, I want you to correct me right then. One, I don't want to make the mistake again. Two, for the editor or for me if I'm editing, I want to be able to handle it right there. I don't want to get to 50 minutes in on an hour episode, have you tell me, and I've got to find every single instance of where I got that word wrong and have to do a pickup on each one of them. Pickup being a correction, if you're not familiar with that term. And I'll tell people, I'm going to put this down phonetically, but I might mess this up because I'm in my head trying to make this interview great. I might go back to this wrong pronunciation, especially if we've been going back and forth. David. I'm like, what? I could mess up my own name like that. But I'll tell you, after doing hundreds of interviews, many of whom with people with unique names, I work in the entertainment industry, all sorts of unique names. Some of them made up, some of them given. Stage names, people make something up. I've never had anybody get mad. People with unique names are used to this. Check this out.
She's a U.S. senator now running to be vice president, but some people still don't know how to say her first name. In 2016, she released a video about it with some help from some little friends.
It's not Kamala. It's not Kamala. It's not Kamala.
It's Kamala.
Kamala Harris.
Well, the senator says she's used to people mispronouncing her name, but says it's easy to remember. Just combine comma with la, and you get Kamala.
That was 2016. And Kamala Harris, she is still having an issue with people getting her name wrong.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala won't, and Joe Biden simply can't.
Kamala, I call her laughing Kamala.
Kamala Harris.
Now that she's running for president, we've heard that a lot. Does Kamala Harris care? No. Again, people with unique names, they're used to that. But you are going to look like you haven't done your research. And it's really bad when people assume that you have no idea. I think some of these guys are doing this on purpose with Kamala. Or are they? If they're not doing it on purpose, they look like idiots, like this guy.
Mr. Dumbass, I can bring a lot to Dumbass and Dumbass. I'm a go-getter. Dumbass material all the way. So, am I your man, Mr. Dumbass?
The name is Dumas.
If you do know better, or people think you know better, it looks disrespectful. And you do not want that. That's where it flips on you. I think some of these guys who don't know how to pronounce Kamala, they think they're being clever. Yeah, maybe to the base. Maybe to the base. Some people, yeah, man, Kamala, ha, ha, ha. We'll see how that works out for them. Anyway, something to chew on. Messing up dates, names, and other info. That happens to all of us. I've got so many funny bloopers. I've got one on my Facebook page. This is linked at bigpodcast.com. I think I messed this lady's name up 5 or 6 times. Maureen O'Connell was her name. Irish singer. And I'm thinking Sinead O'Connor. Similar, right? O'Connor, O'Connell. O'Connor, O'Connell. That's what I talk about. David, David. When you're going back and forth, somebody's corrected you once or twice, it's really easy to get in your head, and then it's awful trying to reset it because you're thinking like, wait a minute, what? Which one's up? Which one's down? You don't know. I'm curious if you've got any funny stories like that. Surely you do. If not, you're not doing enough interviews. Do reach out to me, bigpodcast.com. Are you subscribed to this podcast? While you are there, make sure you're subscribed. Never miss an episode. I've got 3 buttons for you, one for iPhone, one for Android, one for RSS. Click a button. One click is all it takes to instantly subscribe every single episode of this podcast, Build a Big Podcast. The podcast all about growing your podcast, getting more people to your podcast, getting more people to talk about your podcast, more people to send you money. Every single episode delivered to your mobile phone or wherever you want. I got options, man. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That's where you will find them. One click is all it takes. Go there right now before you forget. And I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast. Hey, all right, you're still here. All right. So my last name's Hooper, Hooper. And for whatever reason, Hopper, Hoover, Cooper, this is another way that this can show up. A side note on this, there's another reason why you want to verify a name. A funny story, I was working in a building, still work there. This is where we produce my music business show, Music Business Radio. And I'm getting mail for a guy named David Hopper. And I'm assuming, yeah, it's a typo. It's happened all my life. It turns out there's a dude, David Hopper, in the building. And we've since become friends. It's a funny joke because he's got people coming up to him, said, hey, man, did you write that book? You're that podcasting guy. I got more of these stories for you. Go subscribe. You'll never miss an episode. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. See you there.